So in this lesson today, we are going to be looking at the poem London by William Blake. So we provided you with a PDF version of this text, Trouble, which gives you an insight into life in London in the 18th and 19th centuries. And there are some questions we want you to find the answers to. 3 questions. Number 1, which shop sold stolen goods? Number 2, what evidence suggests the police were corrupt? And which alcoholic drink was popular within the slums? So this is a chance to pause the clip and to look for those answers. Okay, so the first question we asked you to look at, which was which shop sold stolen goods? Carefully, you'll find the answer. The rag and bone shops were the shops that sold stolen goods. Second question asked you to locate evidence which suggested that the police were corrupt. And again, if you look carefully, you'll find that the police accepted bribes, and the evidence was that thieves would pay policemen to look the other way. Finally, the alcoholic drink which was popular within the slums. If you look carefully, then the drink that's named here is gin, and that ties in with a famous painting from this era called Gin Lane, and that painting you'll be looking at in future lessons. Okay, so here's an image of William Blake, the very famous poet, whose poem we're going to be looking at in a bit more detail shortly. First question is to ask, who was William Blake? Well, he was born in London in 1757, so he would have known the city very, very well. He caused controversy with his beliefs. He was a big believer in women's rights, which was unusual during the 18th century. And he believed in liberty for all. He believed everybody should be free. And this was a time when things like slavery still very much existed. As a poet, he illustrated his own works. There's an example here of the poem London where Blake himself came up with the illustration. And his poetry is a key part of what's called the Romantic movement. Now, the Romantic movement, or Romanticism, was a genre of poetry which focused on nature and expressing your emotions, and basically was a rebellion against the Industrial Revolution. The idea that technology was taking over and Romantic poets wanted to rediscover perhaps some more natural images of the world. So here's the poem, London by William Blake. It was written in 1794, and in the poem, Blake recounts what life was like in 18th century London, and he paints quite a dark picture of life in those times. London. I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban, the mind-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear, and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. So to help you get to grips with this poem, we've put a glossary there of some of the perhaps more unfamiliar vocabulary. So it's an opportunity for you to figure out what some of those words mean, and this will help you hopefully make sense of the poem. One thing you might have gathered by now is, as I alluded to earlier, Blake is not portraying London here in the best of lights. He's talking about the difficulties for life, difficulties in life for Londoners during this time. So we're going to look through the poem and look at it a bit more closely. So in that opening stanza, in that opening verse, we've got marks of weakness, marks of woe. So as I suggested here, all the people he encounters seem to be suffering and full of despair. In the second stanza, the word every is repeated. And Blake's use of repetition here might suggest that misery and pain is everywhere in London during this time. Then we've got the mind-forged manacles. So this is a metaphor that Blake uses, perhaps to imply that Londoners feel trapped. If you think about it earlier, manacles, another word for handcuffs or something that would trap you. You've then got, in the third stanza, the hapless soldier and the blood running down palace walls. And again, I think Blake's imagery here wants to sort of illustrate the pain and death. And maybe there's a hint with the references to the palace and soldiers that it's the government of the time or the establishment who are responsible for this pain and suffering. And perhaps that ties in with Blake's own views I mentioned earlier of wanting a better society for those who lived during this time. The final verse then, we've got references to midnight streets and the newborn infant's tear. And this final stanza includes quite dark imagery. Even the newly born babies cry in despair and horror at being brought into this very difficult world of 18th century London. So within the PowerPoint, if you click on William Blake, you'll actually be able to watch a BBC bite-sized clip which explores the poem in a bit more detail. And this is the link here, and this is well worth looking at because it gives you an idea, it gives you a bit more information about the poem and why it was written. So the question we're going to be asking you to respond to is, what impression of London is created in Blake's poem? And this is a typical sort of 10-mark question, so we need an extended response to this task. And one useful strategy when tackling this kind of question is what we call the what, how, why technique. So to think about answers to these three questions. If we think about Blake's poem, then what impression of London is being presented? Well, he certainly presents London as a city of misery. How does he present that impression? With lines like marks of weakness, marks of woe. And why do they imply London is a city that's quite miserable? Well, they suggest that the majority of the population seem to live in suffering and despair. So if you follow these pointers of what, how, and why, it can certainly help you answer this question. So, in your response, what impression of London is created in Blake's poem? We're going to be looking ideally for you to come up with 4 paragraphs. We're going to suggest that each paragraph you come up with should include 2 quotations from the poem, so you end up with a total of 8. And to think about how each paragraph should really analyse how the poem presents these impressions of London. So this is an example of what a response might start to look like. So we've got Blake immediately presents London as a city of misery. The description of these people encountered and their marks of weakness, marks of woe, suggests how the city's people are suffering during this difficult time. So we've clearly got evidence there of how to use the what, how, and why technique. So this is something that we hope will help you answer this question. And that's it. That's the focus for this week. Good luck with it. Remember to get in touch if you need some more help. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn.